When you're an animator, there's one thing you always need to remember. All movement is driven by motivation. Why is something happening? Motivation is what drives movement. I've seen everything that's been said about Metroid Prime 4, and while lots of people definitely aren't happy with how Samus is portrayed in this game, I actually think her characterisation is quite good, and I want to look at why. Mercury Steam gave Samus some thoughtful movement in their games Samus Returns and Metroid Dread, and generally adhered to this unspoken idea that Samus is a stoic type of hero, enduring through hardship without complaint. Something that most Metroid games have pulled off with little effort, mostly because we don't often get to see Samus interact with many other people or beings. She's mostly by herself on these adventures, so there's nothing or no one for her to be stoic for, but that doesn't mean she can't simply embody stoicism within herself. Remember, character motivation. Samus does these missions because it's her duty. She's obliged to persevere because that's how she has chosen to move through life, to bring peace to the galaxy however she can. On top of this, Samus is confident, strong-willed, tough, perhaps a little arrogant, but she's not completely without emotion. We've seen her react in a hasty fashion, perhaps halted by fear. We've seen her act somberly by the death of comrades. We've seen her act cool and flippant in a sort of, no worries buddy kind of way. We've seen her outright give direct affirmation that she's okay. Dread sees her keep this coolness but expands it out into full-on psychosis when she finally snaps from the many years of pure chaos from all her adventures. No matter how stoic and resilient Samus is, she's always had a voice of sorts, even if we exclude Other M. Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion and Zero Mission all have Samus speaking her thoughts out loud or personally recounting events. The original Prime trilogy has Samus make grunts and screams of pain if she takes damage, and Dread has her speak in the Chozo language. She's not devoid of personality or humanity, even when she's putting up a front. So, generally from what I've seen, people dislike her personality in Metroid Prime 4. Why is that? It seems like Nintendo are terrified to give Samus a proper voice or any sort of distinctive character traits since Metroid Other M, the game which saw Samus bluntly narrate her every thought and made her come off like an absolute bore who couldn't think for herself, something which, by that point, wasn't how we had come to know Samus. Let me just say that the animation in Beyond is generally outstanding throughout gameplay, but it's particularly good in the cinematic cutscenes. The motion capture and cleanup is superb, nothing feels too stiff, but it's not over-the-top cartoony or anything like that. It feels grounded, reserved and coherent, but not joyless or soulless. What we have, for the most part, is the Samus we're used to. She's got this upright, confident energy and clearly obeys commands when needed, but is prone to that same delayed thinking as we see here when she's captivated by the return of Sylux. She snaps out of it with this little head flick as one of her comrades is struck. Strength during a crisis is largely what we have come to expect from Samus, and this is what we get throughout a large chunk of the game. But there's some interesting acting choices made throughout parts of the game which seem to clash with this idea, but I think there's more to it. One massive change, which I didn't realise at first, is that Samus's visor never becomes transparent like it does in previous games. The Prime games allow us to see Samus's eyes the whole time, Super and Zero Mission show them in close-ups, Other M would have the visor go solid during combat, but it would become translucent again during cutscenes and dialogue. It's mostly opaque during Dread, but there are times we can see through it in close-ups as well. Aside from inner visor reflections, we never see Samus's eyes in Beyond, and I think that adds a layer of difficulty in portraying any kind of emotion without having to rely on body language alone, but we'll get to that. Before I move on, I just want to compare the two visors in Dread and in Beyond. There's an overall stern feeling that comes from Samus in Metroid Dread due to her downward pointing visor, which gives the appearance of a furrowed brow, and it aligns nicely with the badass action stunts she pulls off. This is the same sort of design Sonic the Hedgehog has as well. You have to think a little harder when giving Sonic a concerned look purely because of the shape of his eyes. Same with the visor. If it were upturned, this wouldn't feel nearly the same. Compare this to Beyond and other Prime games where the visor has a much flatter upper edge, which neutralises that stern feeling and begins to give off a feeling of indifference. And this may be by design. I actually think this provides Samus with a bit more balance and makes us do a bit more work in reading her, and gives the animators a more challenging but rewarding task of bringing those emotions through body language and gesturing. There are subtle things which gently tip the scales of imbalance, like when she touches the Mind Stone, or wherever it is, there's this delicate decision making where she doesn't touch it with the finger that leads the action, but instead the middle finger. It shows that there's a tenderness to her thought process. She's not all brawn and brutality, she's capable of deeper, more meaningful gestures. As I mentioned, this is mostly just classic stoic Samus, just doing what's needed. She is curious as to where she is and what's being shown to her by various robots and such, but it's with restraint and with a little more pensiveness. Now, where everything is different compared to what we're used to is her interaction with humans. She has interacted with humans before, like in Metroid Prime 3, but it's always been to the degree of sure or got it in terms of responses with body language. Nothing that required her to truly engage in any meaningful conversation or communication, usually just a firm head nod. More on that later. What's different here in Metroid Prime 4 is that, in many instances, Samus is addressed directly in a manner that requires a worded answer. Her first meeting with Mackenzie, for example, is quite awkward. He says thank you to her, but she doesn't respond. She doesn't really seem to acknowledge the significance of there being another human on this strange planet with her either. But hey, could this have been something that could have been mitigated if we were able to see her eyes? Where do you look when you're deep in thought? When he introduces her to a mech suit, she does this sort of sideways glance in a sort of, sure, whatever bro, kind of way, but she is generally curious about the suit's presence as much as Miles is. Or at least that's how I interpreted that. She definitely seems to watch people as they speak. It comes off as rudeness in some instances, but I think she would have to not regard anyone completely for that to be true, and she does seem to be listening when spoken to. I like this little bit here as she reaches for the chip Miles has and gently nods her head as if to say, "Give it here, son." Most remarks from Miles, otherwise, are met with a blank nothing. But when asked whether to be teammates, she does give a nod, and not even reluctantly. All this feels in contrast, again, perhaps by design, to other characters' movements, such as Miles. He gesticulates a lot and makes quite obvious motions that reinforce what he's saying, and Nora is, by her own admission, a bit of a fangirl, so she is quite lively in her actions as well. So, motivation. What is motivating Samus to behave like this? Well, maybe there's actually a lack of motivation. This strange planet that's giving her strange visions and headaches is quite wide of the mark of what her duties normally are. This human that she's encountered technically isn't what she signed up for, but this then rubs up against her overall duty of being a protector, even if she is a bounty hunter and does it for a living. A lone bounty hunter would be isolated a lot, so Samus has probably lost a lot of social skills from lack of human interaction. You could argue that her main motivation is driven by curiosity, exploration and adventure, with a galactic protector being the vehicle for that. She's diligent and clearly has a technical mind, showing quick physical movements that reflect her quick thinking. Again, motivation. Samus is technical, and this interests her. She is genuinely interested in watching Miles work on the fire shot, going by the small movements that she watches his motions. And, if I'm not mistaken, there's even a very small head nod as she marvels at his tech wizardry. There are times of softer, more candid moments within Samus's behaviour, such as this point when she's not quite sure why the doors have locked, only to sharply turn around to see a Cybot. A side note. Seeing her strain like this is actually quite nice, as it actually shows that she is able to react to something a little more physically. Alright, let's talk about the head nods. This is Samus's main form of conversational engagement throughout the story, and while most of them are super subtle, there is variation within this. The speed of her head nods can mean the difference between reluctance and eagerness. One of my favourites is this particular one she gives to Mackenzie, which has a very slight arc to it, which gives off a sort of, "yeah, damn right I will" kind of vibe. She does give an unprompted nod here to Nora, perhaps as a way to begin easing the bridge between them, as she is her biggest fangirl after all. Samus is actually a bit of a big head by this point in the timeline, as when requested to identify herself by Duke, she merely walks out of the shadows to reveal that it's the one almighty Samus. She also subtly regards herself when he mentions that sending Samus to rescue them was a bit overkill. This sort of links back to that arrogance I was talking about earlier. She does have other ways of communicating, such as demonstrating physically where she's headed when asked directly. And she can show acts of warmth, such as helping comrades up and sacrificing herself. Bit of a spectrum there, but hey ho, I'll take what I can get. Samus does seem to show genuine curiosity with Nora Armstrong, and this is evident right from when she comes through on the radio thing when she approaches it with more enthusiasm than anything else so far. When Samus finally meets Armstrong, she runs around her, admiring her suit, and Samus kinda awkwardly reacts when she's touched, raising her arm slightly in a what is going on sort of way. Samus kind of flounders here a little when Nora asks her a direct question that seemingly cannot be answered with a slight nod of the head.
Sub-super secret mission.
But thinks fast and shows Nora on the screen. However, she does nod shortly after when asked if it's the only way home. Nora and Samus seem to have a warmer connection than the others, which begins to play out more in the mines. When Nora thinks she's lost her sergeant, Samus actually seems to want to come in and comfort Nora just here by the way she steps forward quite assertively, but perhaps a sense of overthinking social cues prevents her from committing to the act fully. This is probably the closest we get to seeing remorse in Samus, this slow contemplation. We can almost feel the internal struggle of wanting to comfort, but somehow feeling it's her fault. And we get a more affirmative nod here when Nora says, "We can do this." As things get more tense, Samus nods more enthusiastically, and you can see that she's much more visibly agitated at this point. Her movements are much quicker and sharper. But this moment right here is where we see Samus at her most emotional and arguably vulnerable in this game. She shakes her head in disapproval and astonishment at the sacrifice Nora is about to make for her, and Samus makes a run for her, but she's too late. I think what we see here is slow but steady character development in Samus. She isn't one for conversations or social interactions or even being around other people. I'm sure some of us can relate to that. But something about these humans on a small scale wanting to be around Samus is reminding her why she does all this. This is what Samus's motivation is. She is in this for the humanity. Her duty is to save people from danger. And I think it's at this point that Samus realises just exactly what she's keeping at bay. We begin to see and feel a sense of remorse growing within her as she glances down, beginning to feel the weight of the sacrifices people have given her. And this comes back again before the end, as Samus reflects on the fate of the Le Morne and how no one was able to help them. She even goes to motion towards View as he also sacrifices himself, displaying this rediscovered sense of connection to others, such as her respect towards Takabe and his stories. And I think we begin to see this mini arc of character building pay off in what I can only describe as Samus opening up to her new comrades by doing the smallest of waves here as they leave back for Mackenzie. This might not seem like much, but I think it's a massive gesture, not physically, to us as viewers that she is softening. But the biggest moment comes when Sylux falls back into space after defeat, which is in contrast to how she's acted towards him earlier in the game. Samus has become a more feeling character, hanging on to her connections, even the negative ones, as any connection is better than no connection in the loneliness of space. Just her going onto her tippy toes is both cute and sad, that she's opening up to one of her enemies as they're about to perish. And the final roundup of this is how Samus reacts when Nora hugs her. She willingly gives her a little pat on the back to comfort her. And one final, slow, sombre nod to confirm that Sylux is gone. Sort of. However you feel about the ending of the game and Samus leaving them behind, we know that she has grown to appreciate and even love them as she realises that this is who she's doing it for. At the end of the game, we do get to see Samus's face, and it's way more nuanced now that we've done a bit of analysis on her character. You can feel an internal struggle dealing with the recent loss, with really subtle facial animations suggesting inner conflict. Her brows are furrowed at first, but they soften as the traumas she's just gone through run through her mind, and I think we can assume this is what's going on underneath the visor throughout the game. Though we see her toughen up and confidently walk away again, not allowing herself to be defeated or vulnerable over this. Could it be that this arc has undone itself and she has closed herself off again, going back to being stern and hard? Or is this a newer, more caring Samus, softened by warm interactions? I say this to my students quite a lot, but I always say animating small action is way harder than animating big exaggerated actions. And I think the animators have done a fantastic job here. Maybe this all started because Sylux slapped her hand away when she offered help. This bit where View apologises for not being able to help her and Samus just shrugs and walks away is absolute gold. If anything, I think all this shows that Samus in Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is actually more nuanced and ambiguous with her emotions than she was in the earlier Prime games, which were a little more direct. Deciding to pull back on more exaggerated movement definitely makes this a more reserved performance, but I think this makes it easier to read the subtle, nuanced expressions she delivers. I think everything we know and love about Samus and her personality so far is present in Beyond, and aligned with other performances. It's just slightly more muted and layered. I think this is why people have a hard time enjoying the animated performance of Samus in Beyond, because it requires us to understand her a bit more than we've ever had to before. Who knows, maybe a Metroid movie might blow all this wide open. Maybe Samus's Visor speaker was on mute this whole time. Like, maybe she was actually talking, but they couldn't hear her.
Clearly, this facility is in complete disorder.
But seriously, I think there's two versions of Samus throughout all the games which people choose to represent. One is a little more brash, and one is a little more reserved. What do you think?